This is a review, a video walkthrough of a pull request that I submitted to the rest.bitcoin.com repository. This video is intended for spend BCH, and but anybody in the developer services team is welcome to review it. There's several files that changed in this PR, 24 of them, and let me just collapse all these. But it's actually a pretty small PR. It's just that I had to create a lot of new files, and so each file has minimal changes. And but it is kind of big, and big can be kind of scary, or confusing, or frustrating to navigate. So I wanted to walk through this. So I've got a little outline of the main things I wanna capture. So this PR, it creates, or it implements the API spec that we've captured in Jira for the new address balance endpoint. So I'm just doing one endpoint right now to keep the PR small. And so this is the specification for this address balance endpoint that we have in Jira. And I captured it in this, I created a docs folder, v3 API spec. So this is the specification for the output that this new address balance endpoint should produce. I did not implement the SLP part. This property exists, but it's just returns an empty object. We'll deal with this part later. Mainly, what this does is it goes out and it gets information from the indexer, and that indexer can be either Ninsight or Blockbook. And then it parses the data so that the data returned is identical regardless of which indexer it talks to, and the output follows this specification. And okay, so that's that. It only uses a post call. I removed the get because we've discussed how we have too many ways to get the same data, and we need to reduce that. And so I chose post because that as following the pattern we've established, you can have up to 20 elements when you make the call, or just one. And the nice thing about post is that the body data is encrypted when you make an HTTPS call, whereas with GET you typically would just do one item, and that item would go in the URL, and that does not get encrypted even if you're using HTTPS. That can be sniffed. So I think post is the more appropriate approach here. So that's what I went with. And this uses the JavaScript classes and the encapsulation pattern that we've discussed and is captured in this video in my YouTube channel, JavaScript Testing Development Patterns, Testing Best Practices. So I talk about these patterns of using JavaScript classes and encapsulation, even though I don't use this word in that video because I didn't know that's what it was called, but that's what that pattern is called. So if you go to the PR, you can see here in the app.ts folder, the new route gets added and then included and then instantiated. And then it gets included in the it's not captured in here, but the old route is still used for the V2 stuff. So the V2 routes, the ones that are in production right now, I didn't touch those at all. None of this code touches V2. This only touches the new V3 route, which is alive, but we haven't advertised it, nobody knows about it, and it should not be getting used in production. It adds this. Oh, okay. So there's this new v3 address new router path. So we'll change this name once this becomes a little more mature. But this is the new router. It's a router class. So this is like the router file. And you'll notice. So it's a class, and here's the encapsulation pattern that we've talked about. And so it's only got two routes right now. It's got just the root route, and it's got just this new balance route, which is a post call. And all it does is it does the input validation. So there's all this normal input validation. Is it an array? Let's make sure the array's not too big. Let's make sure that they passed in valid addresses. So this is all the input validation. And then when it gets to the actual request, it hands that off to one of the indexers. And that's set by this indexer flag. And so by default, it defaults to NinSite. But if the indexer flag is set explicitly to blockbook, it will call blockbook. And those libraries are instantiated right here at the top. And there's also this new route utilities library. This actually isn't new. I just moved it. I created a new library with the same functionality using the JavaScript class and encapsulation pattern. And so there's two versions of that route utils library, and so the new routes will call the new library, which uses the class and encapsulation pattern. And so here are the two class libraries, one for blockbook and one for NinSite. So these are service libraries. They're in the services folder. So yeah, I've talked about that. So the balance method's just input validation, and then it calls the appropriate indexer library. Blockbook and NinSite call the indexers and parse the data. Each returns identical data. Let me just show that. So routes services blockbook, routes services NinSite. So again, it's using classes and the encapsulation pattern. And yeah, so it gets the data from the indexer, and then it parses the data into the format that we're expecting for that, according to that specification, and then it returns the data. And NinSite is exactly the same when you look at that file. Okay, and so the reason we're jumping through some of these hoops and adopting these new patterns makes testing easier. So if you look at the package.json file, you'll see there's a test v3, a test v3 no build. These are the unit tests, and a test integration v3, and those are the integration tests. And so there's integration tests right here. If you go test v3 integration, there's integration tests for blockbook and NinSite, and following the best practices, these are the ones that actually call the live services, and they test that the live service is returning data that conforms to that API specification, and that's testing live data. And then the unit tests are in v3 unit, and these I have 100% test coverage for these new libraries, for these three new libraries, the blockbook and NinSite library and the new address route library. So if you run the test v3 or the test v3 no build script, you'll see that it has 100% test coverage. And so that's using mocking, and again, it's testing that the mock data conforms to the specification. So if anything ever changes, like if NinSite changes in the output and they don't tell us, that'll get caught with the integration test, and then at that point we'll update. We'll adjust whatever we need to adjust, either the specification or the parsing of the raw data, and then we would update the unit test to reflect that. But the unit tests, they cover more than just that. They cover, the ability of the function to catch and handle errors, to instantiate itself, and it's a pretty small library, so that's why I was able to get 100% test coverage. So hopefully, as we build these libraries out, we can maintain this 100% test coverage. And yeah, it's using the same test patterns as illustrated in this video, this JavaScript testing video. So if you see me doing something in the test that doesn't make sense, go back to that video, and that should clarify everything. Okay, those are the main things I wanted to cover.